Hi friends, this is a bit of an excerpt from chapter 1 of my book, Teardrops That Tango. It's been out since July, and I'd like to give people a little taste of what it's about. It's limitless as far as content, but I wanted to just specifically start with chapter 1. I know a lot of people can relate to this chapter, sadly, so let's just begin. Chapter 1, Kirk. A mere moment too late, and we can never reach them any more in this world. They will not be cured by our most efficacious drugs, or slain with our sharpest swords. F. Scott Fitzgerald. I'll never forget the last words my fiancé said to me before I watched him die. You want me to end all your problems, Amber? I'll end them all right now. He spat his words through clenched teeth. His jaw was locked. His normally composed personality had disappeared and was replaced with that of a hysterical man. A man who was right in front of me. His wrath had quickly diminished what I knew of the easygoing man I was scheduled to marry in only 2 months. He struggled and clawed against the air, moving towards our bedroom. The breath locked in my lungs when he reappeared clutching his father's 9mm Smith & Wesson gun. His forehead was slick with sweat as he buried the muzzle of that gun into his right temple. A pang of futility pierced right through me, blanching the color from my face. The pulsing terror was so acute I was virtually paralyzed, almost like I'm getting right now. My mind struggled to defy this indefinable moment as Kurt wielded that gun. I was frantically holding on to his life by my willpower alone. But my wits were sapped. Wrestling with reality, my vision distorted, watching my life played out like a movie on fast forward, jumping from one random event to the other. I wasn't in a real life drama, but a nightmare. How could this be happening? Kirk's legs quavered as he tried to stabilize himself. I could feel my throat begin to swell when he narrowed his eyes and tightly pursed his lips. I struggled to escape the rising panic that twisted within my newly pregnant belly. His nostrils flared as his index finger curled around the trigger. Oh no, please. God, no. Merely hours before, our joy had been looked upon as enviable. How did we get from selecting baby names to this desperate position, characterized by twisted threats of self-execution? In the beginning, I'll send someone right over, Amber, the raspy male voice responded through the walkie-talkie static. Offended by and annoyed by customers like this one, I crossed my arms and tapped my foot, glancing every now and again at the watch I wasn't wearing. I had never required a captain's help before, which was really our appealing name for a bouncer. At work before, the bouncers' faces were unfamiliar images that melded with those of the masses of other employees at the restaurant. I only recognized their sharp business attire. The plastered patron who had initiated my need to summon the captain attempted to pinch my backside again. Tumbling off a bar stool in the process. It's embarrassing. I was incensed with him, my irritation recognizable in my offended grimace. I waited impatiently for my coworker to remove this guy. Suddenly, reinforcement began to funnel towards me in a posh blue suit. The atonal music of the busy night seemed to hush in the awareness of him. Mid-tap, my foot went motionless, my mouth gaping in awe. Demanding veneration, this captain walked in long, big strides, appearing like a force of nature. I kept my eyes trained on this man, feeling drawn to him as though he was tugging some invisible rope that was around my waist. My arms plummeted lithely to my sides in submission. Who is that? At 6 foot 8 inches tall, it was impossible not to take notice of this striking man. He was intimidating, but beautiful. Hoisted head and shoulders above everyone else, I squinted to see the black name pin on his upper chest. A step closer and it came into focus. Kirk. He was smiling indulgently, his faultless olive skin radiating from underneath his clothing. He had straight, jet black hair that was slicked back, with delectable stubborn ringlets that curled up at the nape of the white of his Oxford collar. His piercing brown eyes intensified his cultural elan, making my knees buckle. I suddenly couldn't speak, so I pointed to the drunken culprit. Without saying a word, Kirk looped his hand through the inebriated cat collar's western-sized belt and carried him at least 50 feet to the front door, using the man's head to open the doors. He lobbed drunken sticky fingers into a waiting cab. When the taxi zipped away, Kirk straightened his tie, smoothed his hair with both hands, and swaggered back inside. He was astoundingly quick. The delinquent activities resolved in less than 2 minutes. My stomach quivered as he came back inside and boldly promenaded towards me again. Speak, Amber. Get yourself together, girl. Are you okay? His stunning eyes began to search my blouse for my name badge, making my chest feel fiery. Amber! I almost shouted, thrusting out my hand for him to shake. Yes, I'm okay now, Kirk, embarrassed by my stuttering. It's nice to meet you, Amber. He accepted my handshake with a demure but amused smile. His enormous hand consumed mine. Forked lightning speared through my body when our hands joined. My eyes darted up to meet his. Did you feel that? I marveled at the sensation and questioned his eyes to see if he felt it too. But he seemed even and unruffled. I think it was just me. You just let me know if you have any more trouble, he said. I bobbed my head up and down to indicate that I would. Yeah, I'm scorched from your heat, but I'm good, I thought to myself. I evaded eye contact with him once more, but when I dared to sneak another peek at him, he winked at me before walking away. I flushed, tingling from head to toe. His smile seemed to glow in the dark. I realized I had been holding my breath, and finally I exhaled in a huge whoosh. When I regained my footing, I turned towards my coworker and whispered, "He's mine." I couldn't stop oogling him throughout the night. A mere moment more with Kirk and I would have been the cat collar removed for sexual harassment. Returning home after my shift, I was still thinking about him. How handsome and mysterious he was. How swiftly he had rescued me. I couldn't wait to see him again. That night, when I checked our work schedule for his hours, I saw that he was off tomorrow, and I worked. Crap. I sauntered off to my workstation, frustratingly kicking at invisible stones on the floor. Sooner than my heart could sink, I saw him walking right towards me. Oh God! I spun around and quickly slathered on some lip gloss. He reminded people of the actor Steven Seagal in younger years. And I could see the association, especially since he was very into karate, and he was a black belt. He had obviously just showered, and he was wearing clean karate pants and a white t-shirt. Tightly knotted on his waist was a black belt. The scent of soap and a mild men's cologne wafted from his body. He casually sat in one of my booths. His hair was disheveled in such a cute way that I wanted to reach out and slowly twirl one of those black ringlets around my index finger. Stop that, Amber! I anxiously flattened out invisible wrinkles in my skirt, combed my fingers through my hair, and walked towards him. Just don't fall on your face, Amber, I told myself. I nonchalantly smiled. The actress in me taking over with a composed, even detached, job performance. Robotically, I offered him a menu and asked if he'd like something to drink. I was looking back and forth between him and the now quivering menu in my hands. Why can't we will ourselves not to tremble? I thought. When he reached for it, it was clear he was not shaking. His large hand instantly covered half of the entire menu size. Kirk never broke eye contact with me, which caused me to inadvertently start biting my lip and shift my feet. It was as though he relished in seeing me flustered. Guess who immediately failed in her coolness attempt, I thought to myself. He finally answered, I'll just have a bottle of water, please. His voice was so suave and cultured that I didn't even respond right away. My stomach was too busy quivering, and the restaurant suddenly felt so small. Are you all right? He asked. Hearing his voice again made me blink out of my daze, and I stammered back into gear. My father had taught me on how to interpret men, and I knew this god in a suit was trouble. Of course, I said thickly, determined to respond casually. I was irritated with myself for appearing so awkward and frazzled. One water, coming up, I chirped, and I scampered away like a frightened rabbit. I tried to keep from looking in his direction, but every time I risked a glance at him, I saw that he was watching me intently. His gaze was almost sexual. I nearly felt taken right there. Lord, this man is hot, I thought to myself. Upon the delivery of his water, he began to invite me out on a date, but I accepted before he could finish asking. The intensity of our magnetic attraction was so powerful that we fell in love almost instantly. We were two kids in love. I was 18 years old and Kirk was barely 21, and we heaved ourselves into a relationship that took off at a fierce gallop. If we weren't working together, we were playing together. I always liked being linked to his arm or enfolded in his embrace. I loved being wrapped up in his chest. He made me feel sheltered. He made me feel important. He was sociable, humorous, and trendy, always donning the most modern of Italian fashions, most of which he had custom tailor-made because of his extreme height. We frequently went dancing, shared laughs at many different comedy clubs. or dined out at his favorite restaurants, especially small bistros. Kirk had a quick wit and a silly sense of humor. He had no trouble meeting people and could single-handedly break the ice with style. When he entered a room, he'd usually slap the top of a door frame with his palm. He'd whirl around and grab his forehead, moaning as if he'd hit his head, grunting, "Oh!" like a hurt animal. The room would explode in laughter. Little did I know at the time that these comedic episodes disguised a man so tormented by depression that he tried to take his life in the past. One time requiring hospitalization after overdosing on handfuls of medication after the separation from a girlfriend. Bartending was exceptionally popular, even chic, in the early 90s, with academies and schools popping up like convenience stores in every city. We had recently seen Tom Cruise shine as a sexy bartender in the new movie Cocktail. Definitely not new anymore. With stars in his eyes but cautious feet still planted in his business aspirations, Kirk wanted to shift his position at our workplace from captain to a much more highly paid bartender. He studied for months, memorizing drink recipes and receiving challenging pop quizzes from me on usually a daily basis. Flashcards and drink recipes speckled the apartment walls and were taped daily to the bathroom mirror and on the refrigerator. Before I knew it, I found myself dreaming about bewildering cocktail requests. "A sex on the buttery iron curtain, please." "Oh no, how do we make that?" I thought. Perhaps basic bartending skills can be taught, but a truly great bartender ensures that every little detail is perfect and executed correctly. Before long, Kirk was acing numerous bartending tests. He loved bartending and took pride in electrifying people with unusual flaring, such as flaming glasses and juggling bottles. I watched him with pride as he captivated and mesmerized customers with his newfound talent. On the many nights we worked together, I would literally jump. Sudden loud surges of shouting and applause originating from the main bar. What in the world was going on? I had to explore the enthusiastic noise only once. I saw Kirk entertaining hordes of people. He was so charming. Everyone was clapping in sync to each of his movements. When he poured, he reigned. Knock for 6. My period had always been fairly regular, so when I suddenly felt hungover, dog-tired, and experienced a bout of nausea without the drinking, I bought an at-home pregnancy test while Kurt was at work. Tearing it open, I followed the crude steps, pee on the little stick, and wait, and wait, and wait. I sat on the toilet, plopped up my elbows on the sink, and stared at the stick test as if it were lethal. It felt like the longest 3 minutes of my life. Kirk and I had only been together about 8 months, so when those 2 fuzzy pink lines suddenly told me I was pregnant, I felt irresponsible and reckless. The real world was about to become all too real. I must have looked childish when I told Kurt that I was pregnant, fidgeting like a little girl, fearful of his reaction. I was astonished at his over-the-moon, delighted anticipation to become a father. He was exceptionally happy. It was almost as if he had wanted this baby all along. About a week had passed after discovering I was pregnant. We were both hard at work when I unexpectedly heard Kirk's voice over the main intercom. "Miss Amber Cote, would you please come to reservations?" I was surprised to hear his voice, as he didn't typically use the intercom, as part of his job anyway. He was up to something. I just didn't know what. I sprinted towards his voice at top speed. My heart jumped hurdles as I chased the voice excitedly. What is this all about? I saw him leaning confidently against a mahogany podium. I caught my breath and looked around, realizing that every eye had now turned to watch us, to watch Kirk. Swaying towards him, I swung my body a little extra hard in order to feed the adoring swarm of hopelessly romantic people that surrounded us. I blushed in flighty delight. He smiled at me, winked, and confidently announced, "Amber Cote, I love you." The intercom suddenly protested with some squeaky feedback that made everyone giggle. "Will you marry me?" He let go of the microphone and sprang down in front of me, dropping down to one leg, then to one knee. The whistling and men's hooting increased. Even on his knees, I was staring almost eye to eye with him. I excitedly shouted, "Yes!" He took my left hand and placed a stunning engagement ring upon my finger, and he kissed the top of my hand. I was bright-eyed and thrilled. I shot up into his arms, kissing his cheeks. Romantic whistles and varying tones of congratulations continued and reverberated throughout the restaurant. The throng around us cheered and clapped. Kurt laughed. His amusement sounded like the bark of a content seal. I was anxious about life happening so fast, but excited about creating a family together. That night, after watching our favorite late-night program, SNL, Kurt cuddled up behind me and whispered sweetly into my ear, "You're going to have a little girl, and you should name her Kyra." I didn't say anything. But what did he mean by "I will have a girl"? What happened to we? Kurt had always said children keep you alive. I didn't think much of it. It just simply made sense with heirs. But he mumbled as he closed his eyes and lovingly laced his fingers over my belly, and we fell asleep. Those red flags. I rushed home from work feeling violently ill, but I wasn't sick. I was operating on instinct now. Kirk had threatened his life. His battle with depression surfaced a few months into our relationship. As I fumbled for the house key, my unsettled thoughts summoned up all of the times my own mother had threatened suicide. The current ordeal involving Kurt wasn't as shocking to me as it may have been for someone else. That is, until I stepped inside the apartment. Eerie notes were scattered throughout the apartment. Each incorporated his farewells and goodbyes, valedictions and directives for his funeral. "Play me" was haphazardly scripted on a post-it note and smoothed on the metallic silver on our stereo. I was attentive when I pushed play. The grief-stricken melody, "No One Is to Blame" by Howard Jones, resounded through our small apartment, crying out to anyone who would listen. I was listening. My chest went tight with sympathetic sorrow. My breathing redoubled through pain-constricted lungs. "I'm so sorry, Kirk. I want to help you. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see another memo on the VCR. My heart sank. As if in a dream, my fingers wobbled as I nervously pressed play on the TV and VCR. The television lit up the room suddenly, the volume so jarringly high that I had to flinch. The movie Young Guns was describing the epitaph of Billy the Kid. It was heartbreaking to observe I could easily resist confrontational urges to scream or bark at him tonight. In my mistaken bravado, I thought I could help him. I could restore him and relieve all of his pain, all of his trepidation, by talking him through as if this were just an episode. I was not a doctor, a psychologist, or a counselor. I was not a magical muse who could supernaturally expunge his despair. I just didn't know it yet. It's often a vital mistake that many people make when dealing with someone who's suicidal. I didn't want to embarrass him in front of his friends and family, but I finally did tell his best friend about his suicidal tendencies. I had to tell someone. I was stunned when he wasn't the least bit surprised and told me, quite matter-of-factly, that Kirk had overdosed a year before. Because of that failed relationship, it seemed as though Kirk's terrorizing threats weren't surprising to anyone but me. But I didn't feel any safer discussing details after that. What have I gotten myself into? Kirk unexpectedly walked through the door of the apartment with a fevered look in his eyes. He was rumpled over and looked like he felt hopeless. I weightily threw my arms around his neck, almost knocking him completely over. I was so thankful he hadn't hurt himself. We stayed up all night long talking and crying it out. Our noses ran like faucets. We never went to sleep that night, greeting the sunrise with swollen and sore eyes. We were chortling and laughing unrestrainedly to old Sam Kinison videos. That was Kirk's favorite comedian. The whole event was inappropriately sentimental but morose. I may have been victorious today, but not surprisingly, I would end up failing Kirk. I believe that on that present fateful day, as he waved this gun directly above me, his threat would just be like the ones I had heard other times from other people I loved, who had just flippantly threatened. Only a threat. I was dead wrong. There was no time in that room. His rage-transformed face was repulsive, his glower unwavering as he loomed over me, still menacingly wielding the gun. I gaped at him. The blood was pounding hard in my ears. His brow was furrowed, showing his disorientation, inability to even collect himself. Deluged with aggression, this ticking time bomb was not the Kirk I adored. He began to pace the apartment like a restless tiger in a cage, unrelentingly wandering back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Kirk sustained his patrolling pace but increased in tempo, making me feel almost hysterical. What is going on? I blinked back tears and tucked my legs tightly beneath me on the couch. It somehow made me feel better. I turned my head up to look at him. I wanted to up the ante of rationale. Put the gun down, Kirk. You're really scaring me, I pleaded, suddenly needing to clear my own throat. He hesitated and glanced sideways, right at me. He allowed the weapon to drop to his side, but he held his grip. I was appreciative the gun was not pointed at his head, but that fragment of relief was all too fleeting. I nervously stroked the leg of the coffee table with my foot. I had no idea what to say or do next. He took a menacingly step closer. In a defeated tone, I asked him, "Why in the hell are you doing this to me?" I know it sounds cliché, but everything immediately slowed down, as if I were watching a movie. I froze, stock still. Overcome, Kirk squeezed the gun's base so tightly that his knuckles went white. Knowing what was coming next, his face went taut, and he scrunched his eyes shut. "No, no, please, no!" Even though time stood still, I had no time to react. A loud pop echoed through the room, and Kirk's head jolted back. It didn't sound like a gunshot, it sounded like a firework. Until Kirk struck the ground. The floor quaked beneath him. Thud! I fluttered my eyes open and closed, trying to block out this image that was playing in front of me, but he wouldn't evaporate, and this wasn't a dream. Kirk lay there unnaturally still, like a broken mannequin. I felt like running away in panic. This can't be happening. What do I do? What do I do? Call for help. I leapt for the phone, and in a panic, flustered, I dialed 1411. Oh God, I can't remember the number for 911. Trying not to lose control, I dialed 1411, 141, 411, 119. No! 911. The emergency operator answered, and I blurted out in a combination of tears and screaming, "My boyfriend just shot himself." I urgently gasped for breath. "Where do you live?" she calmly asked me. "I don't know," I lowly whispered, and I really didn't know. The shock hit me that quickly, and I was as helpless as a child. It was as if a black curtain went up in front of me, and I was immediately jumbled and disoriented. "What's your name?" she professionally questioned in a nice, melodic tone. "I don't know," I muttered. My reality was warped. I was in an emotional blackout. Just like an unsafe surge of electricity will trip a circuit breaker, a sudden trauma can trip our emotional circuit breakers. Mine were tripped. My life had completely changed in the blink of an eye, as fast as a speeding bullet tearing through tissue. "It's okay, honey, just stay on the phone with me." The operator's voice was composed and soothing. I could hear her typing quickly. I somehow felt less frightened just knowing she was there with me. But I couldn't be comforted. "The police are coming, sweetie. I need you to step outside with your hands out to your side. Can you do that for me, honey?" Her engagement kept me from slipping into total darkness. Yes, I'm going outside. Go outside. Now." I wasn't sure what I was saying as I grappled with the doorknob. My hands were clammy and wet from the upwelling terror of a situation, and it was difficult to clench the slippery brass knob of the front door. My hands were so clammy. "I'm trapped here." The horror intensified when I thought I couldn't get out of the apartment. The air was tainted with the smell of blood and death. I looked back to see Kirk, impulsively terrified that he might be standing right behind me, reaching out for me, wanting vengeance for my failure to save him from himself. But he remained in a twisted knot on the floor. The bullet's entrance had made shrapnel of his temple, and blood oozed down his head. Through the deafening confusion, I unexpectedly heard concentrated, deep, long breathing. I jumped. I tasted my heart, that had jumped in my throat. Was it my imagination? Did I just hear that? The deep, bottomless breathing continued. I realized it was coming from Kirk, as if he was in a comatose-like, very deep sleep, but definitely alive. Excited but scared, I took an experimental step towards him. Small blood bubbles were materializing in the cerise puddle under his face, gradually seeping and expanding outward onto the carpet. He's alive! Oh my God, he's breathing! He's breathing, I squealed, almost dropping the phone. My mind remained shattered into a million pieces. Was I breathing? I dragged a deep breath into my lungs. It was difficult to inhale. I desperately wanted to turn him over, but I was immobilized with fear. I was too cowardly to touch him. The operator began to type faster and then repeated her request that I get outside the apartment. Wiping my clammy hands repeatedly on my uniform to dry them, I got out and was immediately met by 5 or more police officers. They were kind, and within minutes I was rushed downstairs and my hands were washed for traces of gunpowder. An emergency service officer looped long medical swabs up and down my trembling fingers. All I could think about is what I would say to Kirk when he woke up. Would I hug him, hit him, or both? I couldn't think clearly. Couldn't orientate myself. I nervously twirled my engagement ring on my finger. I refused to accept that this is what was happening. My brain may have known this was his death, but my heart stubbornly insisted on Kirk having immortality. Kirk is not dead, I said to myself. The rattled young officer had no idea what to say to me. He fumbled for tissues to wipe the blood from my face. I allowed my chin to rest lightly on his one hand, while the other dabbed my cheeks. I drew in the deepest breaths I could, but could only manage this wheeze. The cop kept whispering, "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." And he shook his head from side to side. I stood motionless, saying nothing in my trauma-induced fog. Despite my best efforts to look elsewhere, my gaze managed to stray backwards towards the apartment. A cluster of medical technicians were carrying Kirk's body down the circling complex stairs. There was no gurney. 5 or 6 emergency techs strained while carrying his body because he was too large to move around the encircling sharp corners on a common stretcher. A urine-yellow streetlight illuminated a crimson U-shape of blood under his tightly wrapped, mummified head. He was unhurriedly lifted into the back of the ambulance, and they just closed the door so slowly. Hurry up! He's breathing, I thought to myself. I wanted to scream out for some haste. Sluggishly, the ambulance drove away with my dreams. There were no lights flashing, no sirens blaring. There was nothing to indicate a rush to save a life, because the life inside was already dead. The despair and gloom began to consume me until it was seamless. I cupped my hands over my face, rubbed my swollen eyes, clawed through my hair. My fingers discovered a small piece of skull twisted up in the strands with blood. Vomit shot into my throat and my heart chilled. Since my parents' second divorce, my mother lived hundreds of miles away. So my nearby father really remained my sole hope for emotional support, which was hard for him. I rushed to his house less than 2 miles away, thank God, and rang his doorbell too many times. My nerves were abraded. "Come on, Dad, answer the door." Finally, I saw him and felt a gust of relief, immediately wanting to coil myself up in his arms, pretend this was not happening. He pushed open the flimsy screen between us, but he looked at me as if he didn't even know me. He surveyed me curiously. It's late. He was probably asleep, is what I thought. I wanted to explain what had just happened, but how could I? I found myself pantomiming with weird gestures until I finally found my speech. "Dad, Kirk shot himself." I was panting for breath. "Are you okay?" he asked. An absurd question. Of course I wasn't okay. Okay? I answered a bit sarcastically. "I guess I'm okay, Dad. I have to go to the hospital now." I wanted him to grab me and pull me into his chest, into his protective arms for a perpetual hug. Desperation seeped from my every pore. "All right then. I'll see you tomorrow, sweet pea." His duplicity was confounding as he casually locked the door. My breath left me. I teetered on his doorstep, staring at the closed door for what felt like hours, but he didn't return. Is this a joke? Should I knock again? Did he not understand what I just said? My eyes filled with tears. A few more bewildering minutes passed. I opted not to call on him by ringing his doorbell again. I was too devastated by his detachment. I would have to go this alone. I had no idea that beyond the cracks of that pasty porch, my father was battling his own demon, an intense struggle with alcoholism. He would barely remember this night. He was too tanked up. At the time, I didn't realize that this memory would haunt both him and myself later on in life. Everything around me appeared as dream images without substance. But I drove to the hospital by myself. I have no idea how I did this. I called Kirk's father before I left. He was already at the hospital, but that was of little solace to me. Our relationship was characteristically absent. Not bad, just not there. Never there. Under the hospital's pinging fluorescent white lights, the somewhat detached doctors began to natter about a full hemorrhage and blah, blah, blah. At that moment, all I really heard was that Kirk was dead, and I felt defeated. At that moment, I must have worn a blank expression because a troubled look crossed one of the doctor's faces. He asked if I wanted to see Kirk. "No!" I responded too quickly, solely out of blubbering spinelessness. Cowardly. I was terrified by what gruesome relic might remain in the husk of Kurt's body. Looking back now, I wish I would have said goodbye. The silence in the room was disturbed when the fledgling younger doctor asked me straightforwardly, "Are you pregnant?" I jumped a bit at his personal knowledge of me. Surely the physicians couldn't tell I was only about 8 weeks along. Kurt's father must have told them. I weakened, recapping my newfangled reality? I nodded my head up and down, indicating to that doctor, yes. "I'm sorry," was all he said, and he bowed his head. Why did he even bother to ask me and probe into my life? Both doctors scuffled out of the room in haste, and I stumbled in their wake. I was sick of hearing sorry from everyone already. In my measly opinion, due to the lack of research at the time, doctors, psychiatrists, and therapists stagger in the dark when helping witnesses and even survivors of suicide. In retrospect, it's not that I expected this doctor to sit down next to me, throw an arm over me, and have an international coffees moment. But if one of the doctors would have offered a simple suggestion to pursue assistance for single mothers, or things that the government offered to single mothers, would have been a lot kinder. I felt more like a curiosity. I presume they had merely confirmed to themselves that fact was stranger than fiction. A moment of comfort came when Kirk's family and I collectively agreed to donate any organs that could be used to help another person. I often think who that precious gift has helped. Kirk's skin was bequeathed to burn victims. Every time I so much as burn my finger, I think of them. And I think of Kirk's amazing gift. I'd been living with Kirk's dad for over a week now, sleeping in Kirk's childhood bedroom in order to feel closer to him somehow. His dad really wasn't the lovey-dovey type, so this hospitality was very generous, if not uncommon. I hurt all over, inside and out. I was particularly susceptible at night. Living in his room helped me to briefly stretch actuality by preventing reality, and award myself with a fabricated impression that I was still close to Kirk. It felt as though he was permanently near. Although unhealthy in the long term, I needed to believe he was still there, with me, somehow. Whenever I risked closing my eyes, I saw Kirk with a gun trained menacingly at his temple. His skin was pale, but his lips were reddish pink. He suddenly squeezed that trigger. His head jolted back and his limp body twitched on the floor. When I woke, screaming and trembling, Kurt wasn't there. I floated my hand over his typical side of the bed. The sheets were cold and devoid of any warmth. Nobody had lain there. I stirred, trying to cry myself back to sleep in order to take a crack at a different dream. The telltale heart. A day or two later, I returned to the apartment alone to undergo the dreaded and frightening task of packing up my paltry pile of belongings. Gritting my teeth, I opened the front door gradually. As soon as the door cracked open just an inch, the pungent smell of death hissed through the crack. I stiffened. The odor was so nauseating that I suddenly fought off the bile clambering up in my throat. Thump, thump, thump. Bargaining with terror, I left the door half open. I scattered newspapers over the primary blood stain in the center of the floor, but like an Edgar Allan Poe's The Telltale Heart, it seemed to call out to me, adding to my remarkable fear. Thump, thump, thump. I swore I overheard the solid pounding. Priorities first. I searched out Kirk's jacket, holding it up to my face and inhaling deeply. His scent had disappeared. Too much time had passed since he worn it. Thump, Attempting to ignore the pounding fear, I uneasily rubbed the coat's collar and tried to smell it again, as if this jacket were a scratch and sniff. Nothing. Disappointed, I folded it carefully and placed it in a special box with all my most important items and documents, which really didn't add up to much. Thump, thump. Knock? A terribly regrettable oversight was about to knock the breath out of me. I was hastily filling a battered liquor box in the kitchen when the unexpected rap on the door certainly startled me. A peppy mail carrier handed me a box containing an elegant set of embellished silverware. I couldn't help but to envy the mail carrier's cheerfulness as well as despise it. I promptly searched out the gift card, but I gasped in disbelief. Grief hit me like a wave. I felt like I was drowning. The elegant gold script writing on the card stared up at me. Congratulations on your wedding. We love you, Nan and God. My grandparents. God help me. Reality suddenly struck. I had gone from planning a wedding to planning a funeral. I staggered out the door to get some fresh air. Struggling to quell the tightening in my throat, I threw myself to the ground, weeping. Opening my eyes, I was mocked yet again. This time by our friendly tan welcome mat, now under my face. I could not stop the unconstrained pain being released through my tears, sniveling in agony. My thoughts were interrupted by the prospect of single motherhood. You're alone and pregnant, Amber. Finding out. It's much too late for goodbyes. Julian Lennon. Hi there, this is Amber's mother. My mom was sprightly and chipper when she called my workplace, puzzling my manager, who was also a friend. I'm so sorry. Mom cut her off, still motivated by her celebration plans. I love your help. I need the addresses of Amber's co-workers so I can throw her a well-deserved bridal shower. Mom's enthusiastic request made my manager realize that she observably didn't know. Please call your daughter. She really had no idea what to say, insisting that Mom call me, but Mom heard the wobble in her voice and demanded she tell her what was going on, and Mom could be convincing. Kirk shot himself. My mother dropped the phone. Discovering Kirk's death through a virtual stranger, Mom called me and we talked, but I have no recollection of what either one of us said, or any conversation around that time, for that matter. I remained vacant. I just wasn't home. I'd gone fishing. I was out to lunch, not playing with a full deck, just engaging in bizarre behavior. Now that my family knew Kirk was gone, they were about to take advantage of my turmoil. I was in a dumbfounded haze, attempting to grasp that I would be burying Kirk the very next day. Internment. The day was eye-stunningly sunny. Relentless warm hugs burned cheerfully on my neck, making me feel ridiculed by Mother Nature herself. I couldn't believe I was standing at Kirk's funeral. The cruelly amplified by the unkind, stifling heat, and the lack of even a slight, soothing breeze. Nothing felt real or tangible except for pain. I was asked not to have any part of the planning of the funeral, but because of the prolonged shock, I probably couldn't have helped anyway. I don't remember much from that dreadful day other than feeling and literally seeing the sticky Texas heat shimmering off the rows of crumbling headstones like electric luminescence. I loathed the people walking around the cemetery sidewalk who were continuing to play out their lives. I felt annoyed at these carefree individuals with no real worries, like being 18, pregnant, and burying your fiancé and father of your unborn child. I just wanted to go home and turn the clock back 5 days. Flee from this nightmare. I whispered goodbye to Kirk, but not only to him, but our very impulsive, but very real dream. My spirit seemed to fade away, and my vitality waned. I cautiously folded our baby's, his only child's first sonogram picture, and placed it inside the diminutive cranny that now held his cremains. His family and I cuddled in his favorite Garfield stuffed animal too, and sealed the niche with the priest's prayers. Such an enormous man was now reduced to such a small alcove. It felt just wrong. The tangled webs we weave. Amber, this baby will be a consistent reminder of Kirk's brutal death, my mother asserted. Right out of the blue, only days after Kirk's death, my family desperately wanted me to forget this dreadful trauma and move on with my life. They didn't understand why, at my age, that I wanted to keep this baby, and they insisted I have an abortion. Time now felt like my enemy. I suppose that's why it's important to never make a major life decision after a suicide. The anguish you're left with often distorts your ability to handle situations and changes and make clear choices. My parents didn't heed such recommendations and refused to merely listen to me and respect their grandchild. Both of my parents felt that their daughter was experiencing horrendous circumstances, that aborting this baby was analogous to a victim of rape option. Their point of view was, how could I possibly move on with my life and forget what had happened, since I would be raising Kirk's baby? He'd always be a part of my life. They didn't know what they were asking me to do. They continually lied to me, trying to coerce me to terminate my pregnancy. Both were sure I would resent the child one day. Conversely, I was terrified of losing my baby and wrestled for his or her life with everything in me. After Kirk died, I felt as though there was nothing left, no life within me, and no life to live for, until I thought about the precious baby I carried. I longed for our baby. I knew how bad off I was. Lord knows what my unborn baby was feeling in my emotional roller coaster of adrenaline blasts and severe depression. If babies sense, feel, and even taste what their mothers are experiencing, and science tells us that they do, then how could a baby no longer than a tube of chapstick survive such an ordeal unharmed? I was horrified to use the bathroom as I carried these thoughts with me. I envisioned having a miscarriage night after night. I was afraid to pull down my pants, unsure of what I might uncover. I feared my underwear would be overflowing with blood clots, blood pouring down my legs. Latent on my panties would be the lifeless body of my perfectly formed baby, partially submerged in tissue and bodily fluids. She would have every finger and toe, but dark spots could be seen under her tissue-thin skin. It was so disturbing. This illusory hurt was unyielding. I wanted this baby so desperately that I sought out hope and protection, and this led me to religion. I began to pray to God. I didn't know much about prayer at the time, but after staring death in the face, I urgently prayed for help to keep a severe depression at bay, at least until I had my baby. Although I wasn't a real Christian, I began to wear a cross around my neck. It made me feel safer, more secure. The phone rang, and I was guardedly excited when my sister, mother, and father asked me out to an all-you-can-eat cafeteria for lunch. Even depressed pregnant women rarely turn down a free meal, especially a meal that is buffet style. My stomach rumbled in anticipation as I confirmed my attendance, adding that I would be more than happy to join them. My parents hadn't given up on the abortion idea, and they had already formed another plan, unbeknownst to me. This wasn't going to be some peaceable communal meal. It was a conspiracy to try to persuade me to believe that abortion would be my only option. I was hiding as much as I could behind my long hair. I was still awkward. I felt awkward, being out among the living. I didn't like seeing people, especially happy people, and I really didn't want them seeing me. I have some bad news to tell you. My mother began the deliberate story. Those 10 words meant trouble, more pain, making me tuck beneath my tresses even more. I stopped moving bits of food around my plate and looked up at her. My appetite vanished as a graveyard stillness filled the air. She let out a heavy sigh, as if this task was daunting and her words were too grim to even voice out loud. Amber, honey, you cannot have a baby. As if in critical, loving concern, she picked up my hands and held them in hers. Her expression was surly, melancholy. I've continually been fascinated with Mom's acting abilities. I'm sure she could be a stand-in for Judi Dench at a moment's notice. You have inherited a genetic disease, and you can't have a baby, she continued. It will die anyway, she lied. I was repelled by her feeble story, but still squirmed in my seat. Oh, right. Nice try, Mom. Amusing zinger. Oh, please. You know that's not true, Mom. I confidently searched my father and siblings' face quizzically for disparity. But neither disagreed with Mom. To my shock, both were stone-faced and bobbing their heads in accord. The hush between them sustained. This can't be true. Fear quaked through me like pulsations through a cable. A shiver went up my spine, my palms dampened with sweat. Without warning, I became so nauseous that I just about threw up Luby's best country fried chicken in front of the entire restaurant. You'll die even trying to carry the baby, Mom unrelentingly persisted, now supplementing the terrorizing morbid fib with threats of my demise. The flurry of agony that coursed through me felt more excruciating than Kurt's death did. All I had left was our baby, that small seed of hope. And I was coerced into uttering goodbye to my now pulverized future? No way. I'll die first. Then we'll die together, I bawled at all of them defiantly. Through the haze of my tears, my father distorted into a blurred form. Staring at the floor and shaking his head, the burning tears filled my eyes, and my heart ruptured all over again. Oh my God. Oh my God. With my father and sister in quiet agreement, I believed I was hearing the truth. For the first time in my life, I knew what it felt to really want to die. I felt so empty inside that I didn't even feel pregnant anymore. How could I feel so hollow, so empty, and be with child? I wiped my hands wearily down my face. No. Why me? In my jumbled torment, if I had a gun, I may have shot myself at that moment, right there in front of all of them. I was that deeply disturbed and all consumed by depression. I reached up to yank that cursed, no-good cross off my neck. Sure, God had rejected me. I was shattered in pieces, pounded down like a trampled puppy. How could He do this to me? I didn't feel protected or comforted by this idol. Before I could give the chain a suitable jerk, my sister seized my arms with tears in her eyes, pleading with me to stop. I did, but begrudgingly. I couldn't frown or smile. The agony was like a living beast. My belly was a cesspool, unrelentingly churning in revulsion. Perhaps seeing the despondency on my face, or not wanting to be blanketed with vomit, my parents' intimidation ended for that day. They would try to persuade me to abort again soon, in an even more violating and detestable manner. I'd like to end here. The next subcategory is Where is the Love? There, Where is the Love? And we have read through page 25. So if you liked this video, if you liked me reading sections of my story on YouTube or videos, leave some comments below. Let me know what you think. It's obviously hard to do, but I'm absolutely willing, to read if it might help people. I've always wanted Teardrops to be free to anyone who needed it. This is certainly free. Also, it is available on Kindle for, I think it is $3. If someone cannot afford that $3, right? I'm on Facebook, I'm on Google+, I'm on Google, I'm on LinkedIn. Everything's under Teardrops That Tango. Twitter, my email is combsclan6, the number 6, at comcast.net, and I will buy you the Kindle myself, as long as I can keep affording it. But it's something that I wanted everyone to have, especially those who have experienced suicide. This is chock full of 4 different suicides that are in my family. My father passed away from alcoholism. Our house burned down on Thanksgiving one year. I have an experience with a very upsetting abortion. I have a little boy with Down syndrome, and that's, it's a little bit of a struggle at first. I think this book would help new parents. I had a tumultuous childhood. My mother was bipolar, manic depressive, so she was mainly just a figure, almost like a primetime commercial in my life. So this book really, it's about a lot of things. So if there's a part you want me to read or anything like that, just let me know. Thanks for staying with me all this time. Peace and love. Thanks, you guys. Love you all.